Christus enim est testamentum regni et, for Christ's crown and covenant. Good evening, everyone. Hell's Unicorn here, after yet another extended hiatus to bring you the shadow eulogy of the dearly departed and oh so affable John McCain. To preface things here, the concept of a shadow eulogy is basically a parody of the mainstream concept in which we delve into the less flattering elements and moral failings of a person's life, and particularly in the case of politicians, it's a very necessary thing to do if we want to have a more realistic grasp of present-day political discourse. The idea first occurred to me back in 2009 when Ted Kennedy, the scumbag senator from Massachusetts, passed away, and it's something that I've done on and off for the past several years, although in recent years obviously my video output has been a bit slow for a number of reasons, something that I hope to remedy in the near future once I get a better computer and a better microphone. John McCain, a man of many titles: independent, moderate, centrist, above the fray, bipartisan, maverick. These were just some of the many vacuous and utterly vapid, yet supposedly complimentary titles that were bestowed upon him by the mainstream media. And these titles, funnily enough, proved to be a bit ephemeral when he was running for president. Now, by way of contrast, some of his adversaries may well have bestowed different titles upon him, such as liar, bitter contrarian, hypocrite. But when you get down to it, there's only one title that truly describes the entirety of his life and also proves as a bit of a teachable moment and or cautionary tale for the rest of us, and that is media whore. Let's face it, the sheer number of accolades that have been pouring out for this man via the mainstream media is getting a bit ridiculous, and we're only a few hours past the actual time of his passing. But nevertheless, there are a few out there who are being at least partially honest when it comes to this man's life and so-called legacy. And far be it for me to quote Rolling Stone magazine, because I'm of the opinion that they've been doing to music for the past 50 some odd years what Limp Bizkit did to it in the late 90s. But they actually provide a very good and surprisingly nuanced insight into the media phenomenon that is John McCain. Now, naturally, it should be pointed out first that Rolling Stone magazine, and particularly author Tim Dickinson, are not exactly above the fray reporting things in a quote-unquote unbiased, dispassionate fashion. Far from it. I've linked 2 articles in the description, and I'm not going to be reading the entire things because you would be up for the next 3 hours listening to me reading a literal book on tape. Nevertheless, the first article was penned back in October 16th of 2008, a couple weeks before the 2008 election, which unleashed the abomination that was the Barack Obama presidency upon us. And it reads as such when looking at the headline: A Maverick Revisited. Note the language: a maverick. John McCain's title, a term of endearment that described him all throughout the 2000 presidential election, as he was the media's favorite during the Republican primary, because he naturally sought their attention constantly, kissed their asses, did whatever he had to do to make them happy, unlike George W. Bush, who was kind of ambivalent when it came to the press, at least at that time. Notice the change in direction here. Where before McCain was the radically independent Republican that was never afraid to buck the wicked Republican establishment whenever it was necessary. Here we get somebody who is having the proverbial book thrown at him. Just about every unflattering thing about John McCain's past is rolled out in the most blunt and brazen of ways. I'm going to read a little snippet from the first major section, which is titled McCain First. And it goes, "This is the story of the real John McCain, the one who has been hiding in plain sight. It is the story of a man who has consistently put his own advancement above all else, a man willing to say and do anything to achieve his ultimate ambition, to become commander-in-chief, ascending to the one position that would finally enable him to outrank his four-star father and grandfather. I tell you, if Rolling Stone had been equally as thorough in their background checks regarding Barack Obama, the election probably would have turned out a bit differently. I'll just put that out there right now. Nevertheless, fast forwarding ahead about a little less than 10 years to the current date, same author, about 4 or 5 hours ago. The headline reads, "John McCain, legendary Republican senator, dead at 81." And the subheading, "The longtime conservative icon was a public servant for decades. My, oh my, how the tone has shifted." Now, to be fair, maybe Tim Dickinson is just not one to speak ill of the dead, but once you get past the 4th or 5th paragraph, you get a somewhat less verbose rehash of what is in the first article. I have to extend a partial congratulations to Tim Dickinson for not allowing himself to become a complete groveling hypocrite who is simply throwing accolades at a dead man while forgetting the past things that he said about him in some sort of self-vindicating quest, for lack of a better term. But you see what's going on here. John McCain, the attention seeker, the person who basically had no principles except for those which would advance his career, according to Mr. Dickinson here, is all of a sudden an icon, a public servant. He's legendary. Pray tell, something seems amiss here. Yea, one wouldn't be far off in concluding that John McCain and Tim Dickinson, and of course by extension the rest of the legacy media, are two equal parts of the same problem, namely the cult of celebrity, and in this particular case, that cult of celebrity being projected onto the political discourse. McCain himself is not a terribly interesting or impressive figure. He's basically a glorified self-promoter. But he has been given this exaggerated status thanks to the projected efforts of the legacy media. And that's what's a bit interesting about the current political climate. Indeed, the Trump phenomenon, be it the Trump train or the Trump derangement syndrome, is all joined at the hip with this. Trump himself is largely the creation of celebrity media. And he's functioning as a virus that is utterly destroying everything that the legacy media has sought to help maintain in the political discourse. It's truly interesting that to this day, this same legacy media, Tim Dickinson in particular, but pretty much all of them, attribute the current so-called populist uprising to the vice presidential nomination of Sarah Palin. They basically blame John McCain for unintentionally ushering this in by selecting her as his running mate. Sarah Palin is an afterthought. Any influence that she had was way on the wane in the aftermath of the 2010 midterms. If anything, her influence was all but killed off in 2012 with the massive failures of all those Tea Party candidates in the Senate. I didn't vote for John McCain, and I never gave Sarah Palin a second thought or even a first thought. I didn't vote for Barack Obama either because I wasn't an idiot. Now, to be fair, there are some people that learned their lesson after the first time and voted differently in 2012, but largely people tended to buy into this cult of celebrity phenomenon. And those of us who didn't tried to create one around the Ron Paul candidacy, and when that didn't work, most of us found ourselves supporting Trump, if for no other reason that we were given a very clear choice between the two. We were given the choice between an unknown quantity that was nevertheless part of the cult of celebrity phenomenon versus Hillary Clinton, a brazen criminal and demagogue who was endorsed by the same media that gave us this cult of celebrity. Now, obviously I've been running off on some tangents and I've been focused more on the periphery surrounding John McCain's latter days rather than John McCain himself. And ultimately, there's a reason for that. Namely that now that John McCain is no longer around to promote himself, he will likewise become an afterthought. The man never became president. Under no circumstances should he have become president. And hopefully his legacy will be forgotten sooner rather than later. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.